this week's program. We're going to be talking about nutrition and cattle. We're going to be talking about cropping. Kerry Moore will be here talking about things, rural women type things, and we're also going to be looking at transport and rules and regulations that you should be aware of, but it's nice to recap. But first of all, why do you want me to talk about Transpower? There's been a few changes, or what's happening?
Well, really, as you all know, Transpower administers the national grid, or looks after it, and they've obviously over the years, we obviously need to switch the lights on, basically. So, and as development's gone on across the country, particularly around Auckland, there's been a few incidences of where the national grid has been intruded on by earthworks or development or what have you, and particularly land development and subdivision going under the grid, under the national grid lines.
And these are, you're talking about these big pylons?
Both big pylons, but there's also local lines as well, so they can be a lot smaller. But what we think of as a national grid in Canterbury is those really big pylons you see going across the countryside. But on the west coast, like in Grey District, it could be smaller lines, and they look a lot more like local lines, they're just slightly larger. And the legislation I'm talking about is the National Policy Statement on Electricity Transmission, and that was gazetted a few years ago now. But at the moment, Transpower are going through a process where they're going around all the district councils and talking to them about their district plan reviews and how they need to recognise this legislation and give effect to it, through their district plans. And what that involves is a discussion, an often very colourful discussion around setbacks or buffer zones for activities from the transmission line, how big that setback should be, and what should be provided for within that setback, even though it's near a line. And this is a very interesting issue to be involved in as a Federated Farmers staff member, because it's something that has a direct impact on our members, and it generally doesn't benefit them all that much, having a transmission line going through their land.
Or it disadvantages them, I would have thought.
Significantly. So you have effectively what you've got is legislation that enables a taking, or a taking away of the value of your land, or a farmer's land, or even someone in town, for the direct financial benefit of a third party, and the third party being Transpower, and the council having to actually do that and operate it through their district plan.
Because if you've got a 10-acre block and you've got a whopping great big power line at one end, yes. I mean, people are going to say, yeah, but that's where I wanted to put my house, no thank you.
No, well, that's really what this legislation's about. It's very, very restrictive on what they call sensitive activities, which are houses, dwellings, schools, kindergartens, that nature, and really the legal requirements are very strong for those. For other activities that aren't considered sensitive activities, it's a lower level of legislation, and the legislation talks about not compromising the network rather than preventing anything happening at all.
Do you guys go into bat about access? Because my understanding is that Transpower got instant and unmitigated access. They can come in when they want to.
That's a slightly different conversation. Generally, they negotiate agreements with landowners for access, so there's easements or what have you, but they do need to be able to access the lines. So and the arrangements vary a lot on how that's accomplished.
Do you get involved with those discussions?
Not generally. Sometimes we help out members around those discussions, but it's pretty hard to prevent Transpower from accessing lines to maintain them and look after them. And there's obvious issues. If you've got I guess a paddock with some stags in it all around the Transpower line, they're not going to get anywhere near it in a hurry, and that's one reason.
Please let me know we want to film it.
Yeah, that's one. But that's the sort of thing that can go on if they don't. If farmers aren't sufficiently recognised in the overall discussion, they could become a deer farmer, and specialise in stags, and you can have them all around your lines or your towers, and they wouldn't be able to get near them, and that's and so there always is an element of negotiation and I guess arrangement making around these Transpower lines, simply because they need to. But this is a separate process, and it's a very interesting process, because what's happening is the district councils are required to administer the safety setbacks for the lines on behalf of Transpower. And so it's a three-way conversation between Federated Farmers, Transpower, the council primarily, and And often it can get pretty tense. In the North Island, there were councils where we came out with proposals to have a strip the width of a rugby pitch, going through people's farms, and all kinds of restrictions, not necessarily expected, but certainly being asked for in the district plan development process. And there's all kinds of issues, like fences are not allowed to be in the electrical code of practice. They're not allowed to be within 5 metres of a line unless they're approved by by Transpower. Now, you think about the implications for a boundary fence. So if you can't build a fence within 5 metres of a line, and that line happens to go down your boundary, what are you going to do? You're looked after by existing use rights, but imagine if you had to replace your fence because your stock were escaping onto the road, or if you wanted to move your entranceway from a dangerous position to a safer position that required moving the fence back into the line buffer, you might potentially be stopped from doing that. And so there's all kinds of implications around the right to use land, which is protected in common law and in the RMA. Safety, which is obvious. You might have people might have stock escaping because someone can't replace their fence. So we really have to be very sensible about these discussions, but also Federated Farmers has to be very vigilant and strict to make sure that it happens right. The final thing is in Hiranui District. We've got a district plan review coming. We've got irrigation schemes coming. People are going to be looking to develop their farms with centre pivots, possibly wintering barns, all sorts of stuff. And where are they going to put them with several high KV lines running through the district from one end to the other? So there's a conversation we'll get into in due course.
I should look forward to it.
Yeah.
And that is why you should be a member of Federated Farmers. Still to come on the program, it's Farm Accounting. We're also going to be looking at nutrition and cropping with Dennis Carter. Back to Rob's Country, talking about accounting. Let's though talk about the vulnerable economy.
Yeah, this week we've had several economists come out and say our economy is vulnerable. Normally we don't sort of take much notice of what they say, but this time they're pretty much spot on the money. They're saying that New Zealand's relying heavily on dairy and forestry. Over the last few years they've sort of grown by 30%, whereas all other exports are down year on year. So for the last 5 years they've been dropping rapidly. And they're sort of saying, well, how can we sort of keep going if we're relying on two main products? If you're a normal business, you can't. So the New Zealand economy needs to start thinking about that, and also the fact that we've got one main customer, really, and that's China. And of course that's been a big focus of the latest government, is the relationship with China. But the economists are saying, hang on, if China goes down, we go down with them. So we need to sort of sit up and start looking at what we're doing.
What do they say about economists? They've predicted 16 of the last 3 depressions.
Yes.
But anyway, I mean, this one could be a bit serious.
Yeah.
What are the implications?
Well, basically, if dairy has a downturn, it would seem unlikely, but it can happen. Then New Zealand, as an economy that's relied on it, is going to be back into sort of a recession, or even deeper than that potentially. And it'll be hard for us to get out of it if one of those, forestry or dairying goes down.
Eggs in baskets, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yep.
How much of a valve is the fact that we've become a investment-based economy for overseas investors?
It doesn't really help us as such. We need to start looking at doing other activities. Stick with what we know, but we need to expand, into really the acknowledged economy. You've got big software companies starting to be developed in New Zealand, and that's the sort of thing we've got to get into. Expand those more and get more export dollars in via other things rather than relying on a couple of main things.
There'll be those who will now be saying, well, what you're telling me to do is to get involved with the dairy industry because that's where the money is. Is that what you're saying? Or are you saying to stick with your sheep and beef and make a good job of it?
Well, from a pure profit point of view, sheep and beef don't make a lot of money, and dairying does. So if you were looking, I'd prefer dairying because of the way you make the dollars. But
even dairy support.
Yeah, there's certainly some good money there. But if you compare everybody, then the other guys that are well ahead, your sheep and beef are well behind and struggling in some cases.
If you do actually look at a sheep and beef farmer or cropping farmer, the return on capital actually isn't very good.
Oh, it's-
Neville used to talk about it in a sort of 1.5% to 2%.
Yeah, it's terrible. You'd sort of, if you were looking at pure investment returns, you'd say, well, why would you put all your money into it? Really, it comes down to all the other factors, lifestyle and those sort of things. You're just not going to make the money that you can if you put it into the bank or even into the share market, for example. It's still a risk, but you're still going to come out ahead in the long run.
Yeah. So what should we be thinking because of all this?
As an economy, we've just got to sit up and say, right, yep, we've got a problem here. If we were a normal business, we'd be taking drastic steps to develop more product or even more markets. But it seems in New Zealand we're a wee bit slow to react at this stage. But that's what we've got to do. Look for better product to export overseas and also to see what other markets we can develop. Look for emerging economies, etc.
Kerry, individual farmers who are sitting at the moment going, well, yeah, but isn't that the marketing boards and isn't that the government's job? What can they do apart from swallow hard?
Well, they've sort of put the pressure on the people that their marketing boards, etc., because some of them aren't really that effective, to be fair. Lobby your MPs, get involved with other businesses even.
Make noise.
Some of them have got a bit of discretionary cash, so perhaps they need to start investing it elsewhere other than just on the farm.
That's an interesting comment.
Well, it's always good to spread your risk around. So
Which is what you've been saying right from the word go.
Yeah, so rather than sort of put it all in the farm, look for some off-farm income. It can subsidise you in times when you have a bit of a downturn or give you a bit of extra cash flow.
Changing the subject to lifestyle blocks.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a sort of influx of people looking to get into them. And the question that they need to think about, is it really a taxable activity like they think they are, or are they just sort of buying it to think they're pretend farmers?
That's shooting from the hip, Kerry.
Well, it's the reality that some of these have got no idea what they're even doing when they get on the property. They buy 10 sheep and they think they're a farmer. It may not stack up for tax purposes. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you buy a lifestyle block, you get the tax deductions, you get refunds because you always run at losses. It's not always going to be like that. It's something that IRD are monitoring. They do look at who's doing what on these properties. And, you know, especially if you put a new registration in for GST, for example, they will ask, what are you actually doing, how many animals you're running, what's your attention, etc. So you could fall into a trap where you don't want to be.
You're suggesting that before you actually do announce to the family that you're going out and living in the country, they should really talk to their chartered accountant.
You need to talk to the accountant because there's a lot of tax implications. If you get into it and your GST register and you start doing the tax activity and thinking you're a farmer and you want to get out, it can be costly. So you need to know all these sort of pitfalls before you get too far in, and that's where your accountant will guide you. They can also take you through what the courts have said in regards to lifestyle blocks and whether you really fit the criteria or whether you're just out there having a bit of fun dabbling.
Because there's nothing worse than budgeting for X numbers of returns or deductions and then finding out from your chartered accountant at the end of the day.
Exactly, yeah. And people think, oh, I'll get a lifestyle block, I get the same deductions as what a normal farmer does. Not necessarily the case. They can be capped, and in some cases you may not even get a deduction. It just depends on exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Thank you very much indeed. So there you are. Before you go and jump into a lifestyle block, I suggest you do. Either give him a ring or your own chartered accountant. After the break, it's nutrition. Welcome back to Rob's Country. I want to talk about nutrition, and we're in the middle of winter. Cows are pregnant. What should we be doing?
Well, partly give them a probiotic. And why? Because a probiotic helps to establish a beneficial gut flora, especially for calving and going into those periods. You've got to look after the cow, but also you've got to look after the calf. The main thing with the calf is born as a monogastric without a gut flora. So we need to establish a gut flora. We've got the choice of either establishing a beneficial gut flora for that animal, keeping out the pathogens, or otherwise the pathogens will establish, creating a lot of the calf diseases that we often see in the newborn animals. And that goes for calves as well as for beef and sheep and all the other animal types.
The fact that a lot of dairy calves don't get colostrum, is that part of what you're suggesting?
That would be part of it. There's two parts to that. It's the quality of the colostrum quite often that you give to the calves, as well as do they get the colostrum in a very short period after birth. So feeding a probiotic, you actually boost the dam's immune status, and that is part of boosting the quality of the colostrum and also boosting the immunity that she's going to transfer to the calf.
Because I know you do that in sheep. You give them the appropriate drugs and whatever you like to call them, and
Yeah.
to build up so you get them through the tailing so that you can give them an inoculation after that.
An interesting thing that often also occurs with calves is when you go onto a farm and you say to the farmer, do you have a problem with scours? And they say no, but I do have a problem with scours towards the end of my calving season. So what happens there is, of course, with each batch of calves coming into the pens, they create increased pathogenic load. So every new lot of calves that comes into the pens are subjected to that higher pathogenic load. One of the other things with using a probiotic, you reduce, and there's been a lot of evidence for that, it reduces the E. coli in the environment as well. And a lot of the scours that we see towards the tail end of calving and the later batches is E. coli-driven scours.
Okay.
By starting early, you actually reduce the effect later on down as well.
It's interesting that the medical, this sort of group of people, whatever you like to say, now coming out in the paper this week saying that antibiotics are making us sick.
Yeah.
So there is a swing, isn't there?
There is. What's quite interesting as well is, well, again, going towards antibiotic, it kills all the microflora that's there. And once you've done that, the pathogenic flora will actually come in. So what you need to do when you've used an antibiotic is actually follow up with a microbial product to establish the beneficial microbial population.
If you have to use an antibiotic.
Yeah, if you have to use.
Lot of a swing away, big swing away from antibiotics?
There is. I think New Zealand is probably a bit slower in that trend in turning away from antibiotics. Europe, of course, has started to move away from antibiotics over a long period. And a lot of the evidence in terms of the use of probiotic is coming from Europe, where a lot of trials and data has been gathered over a long period showing that probiotics is actually beneficial in the short and long term for animal health.
Won't do any harm with our accountability either, will it?
No, it won't. And I think looking back to one of the previous talkers talking about dairy, and we need to establish and maintain the quality of product or the dairy product that New Zealand can supply worldwide. And that's one of the problem things as well, is ensuring that we've got a good product and not using or an overuse antibiotics in the dairy industry.
Pierre, what is the risk of using an antibiotic, because you told me what it does, getting into the milk and therefore getting into the mainstream and cheese not being too good?
Well, once you've got that antibiotic, it kills all the bacteria. So mostly when you're making cheese, of course, you add cultures to that to get the cheese making process. So if there's an antibiotic in that milk that you're using, it's going to kill the culture that you're using, and you're not going to get the product that you want.
So where do people get advice on all this? I mean, obviously they listen to Rob's Country and listen to you.
I hope they do. Firstly, they can, of course, contact myself, and I would be very happy if they want more advice or more information about the use of a probiotic on farm. One of the things that's important in using a product like this on farm is to monitor. You start using a product, what does it do? Look at your KPIs on farm, and what does that help you with? So myself, my number 021.
People won't catch it, Pierre, but
okay.
0800 is at the end of the program, the BioBrew number?
Yeah.
Because I'm sorry, but...
Okay, no, that's
so
no problem.
you do quite a bit of one-on-one though on this sort of thing?
Yes, because once one starts to use a probiotic on farm, it needs to work within the system that farmer has. So for instance, some farmers would use it through a dosatron system, or other farmers would have a mixer wagon that they can mix it into the complete feed for the dairy cows. So depending on the system that the farmer has, and that's why it's good sometimes to get in contact with ourselves and the people of BioBrew to see what can work best into his system, and then also looking at monitoring what happens over a period of time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. You notice I didn't talk about the fact that they only sneaked through by 1 point over Wales. We're not going to talk rugby. After the break, it's cropping, and then we're talking about transporting of animals. And then Kerry Moore will join us, Rural Women, New Zealand. Welcome Welcome back to Rob's Country. You want to get in amongst that yellow flower?
Yes, well, the yellow flowers are not there, Rob.
Isn't it funny gorse is now known as yellow flower because gorse has got a bad name?
It has, and it proliferates around Wellington. It really apparently upsets the natives up there when the gorse is flowering around Wellington because it just dominates the hillsides. But one of our lesser beneficial introductions that we brought into the country. But certainly now's the time to spray gorse when it's hardened off with frost, and it's easier to cover. The flowers are not there, and so using less spray, but do spray to the point of runoff. You have to cover everything, and so when it's hardened, do it now, save some money.
Are they still using it with a dye in it so you can see where it's hit?
Well, yes, if you're in a situation where there's bushes here, there and everywhere rather than a fence line, obviously on hillsides and things like that, a lot of operators are not sure, did I do that one or didn't I do that one? But certainly if you've got, there's plenty of dyes out there, usually a sort of a purpley colour that comes out and covers the bush and say, yep, done that one, on to the next one.
Got it, okay. Middle of winter, storage of machinery.
Middle of winter, quite a few frosts, and there's quite a few bits of machinery on farms that can be damaged by frost, and particularly the spray booms where you've got water inside the pumps, inside the nozzles where you've got non-drip strainers in there. They retain water in there. They can blow the nozzles apart, and taps that have a ball in them. A lot of people just put a wee drill hole in the back of the ball because it just releases the water when you turn the tap off. Otherwise, it holds water in there, and the taps can be absolutely blown apart with the swelling of the frost inside that area. And you go and use the tap, and next minute there's water squirting everywhere.
And then it's too late because that's when you need that gear.
Exactly. So there's that, and you know, engines as far as antifreeze goes, make sure the antifreeze levels are up, and anywhere basically that anything that holds water that's likely to be exposed to frost is quite vulnerable.
And if you do drain radiators, put a whopping great sign on the steering wheel.
That's a very good idea. Yes. Yes.
No water in radiator.
No water in radiator. Do not start in the spring and cook it.
But speaking of things such as sprayers, what about fence lines? Is that when you working on that as well?
Yeah, fence lines and tree lines at the moment. It's the right time where the frost has knocked down the cover. The summer weeds have all had their seed, and the annuals have seeded, and sort of skeletons are there at the moment. But very soon there'll be the spring strikes will start in the ground. So you're looking for something residual to put amongst those trees.
Pre-emergence.
Yes, it's pre-emergence, definitely pre-emergence. A knockdown and a residual, something like TAG is a particularly good one, which is terbuthiazine, amitrol and glyphosate mixture. So you've got a two...
Otherwise known as napalm.
Napalm, TAG for short.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Guess the top used to be, but that shows my age, doesn't it?
Well, that's one, yeah, that's simazine. That's one that can be used, definitely.
Is
yes.
it?
There's
It's
lots
still
of
around?
Those, yeah, definitely is, yes. I'm using it over blackcurrants next week.
Yeah, I've got an embarrassing situation talking about bluestone for foot rot. Really? You're that old?
Yeah, I don't think it's used these days.
No. Are farmers losing a bit of their sort of independence because they're being picked on?
Well, basically, Rob, looking at sort of how people were allowed to farm 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you spend a lot of money buying your farm, and with that you think you own the land, you're entitled to a certain amount of freedom. Well, gradually over time, through perhaps some operators not playing by the rules and becoming quite pushing the boundaries and getting a little bit greedy and a bit reckless with the environment, regulators have come along, and they say that I think you've probably seen those signs on the way to Akaroa about innovation or regulation. And one group of people, they have innovation and others want to regulate. And we seem to be in a society that wants to regulate us at every turn. And so we're being pushed back in what we can do with land use. There's a potential in the future where if we want to change the type of farming that we're doing, we'll have to apply for a resource consent. And we know the costs and the time and the drag on there that goes. And so that's very, very restrictive, considering that you've bought the land and you're entitled to a certain amount of freedom in what you do. There's things like water use. Of course, we're being regulated at every turn in terms of water use, and possibly in the future, if we don't use the water that we're paying for or allowed to, it could be taken back off us because the regulators are saying that we're over-allocated. Well, as soon as they can tell us how much water's there and how much water we're using, then I'll believe that we're over-regulated. We're in the red zone. So there's all those sorts of things. There's fencing directives where we have to fence things now, and keeping stock out of waters. There's
So you're being told how to farm.
riparian rights. We have to plant there. We're being told how to farm, basically, and it's probably because there has been the greedy and the reckless people there. We have to be sustainable, not only financially, but environmentally. So that's where we're going.
Dennis, I'm sure you and I will talk about that again. In the meantime, though, speaking of regulations, I caught up with the MPI guys about transporting of animals.
We have certain areas of criteria that we expect people to meet. Obviously, the main one is body condition. We don't want too light animals going onto trucks, mainly because there's concerns around whether they're fit, not only fit for transport, but can get to the works or the sale in the same condition that they left the farm on. So that's one of the main criteria we look at, and we would expect that cows with a body condition score of 3 or greater would normally be fit for transport. Another thing we look at is, as we discussed last time, was lameness. Cows or animals have to be able to bear weight evenly on all 4 feet, so that when they go onto the truck they can, because they move around and things like that on the truck, they have to be able to maintain their weight and stand normally.
Around the corners and things, they've got to brace themselves.
That's correct, yeah, they do. That's right. So, yeah, just bits and pieces like that. Also, injured animals. We don't want any animals on trucks with broken legs or things like cancer eye and those sorts of things. Ingrown horns into heads is quite a common one as well that we deal with. So we don't want to see any those sorts of things going on to cattle trucks.
Richard, we've just seen Gypsy Day. Does that make you guys go quiet?
Gypsy Day? Yeah.
Because there's a lot of animals moving around, aren't
Yeah,
there? And some of them probably don't measure up.
No, it's okay, I guess, maybe to walk animals, but when you start to put animals on trucks and transport them around the countryside, that's when we can get into some issues if people don't select them appropriately. Farmers may not be that familiar with the transport code, but it's a document they should have in their kit of resources. And it basically the selection of stock is critical to get onto the truck and make sure that animal is going to get to the other end of the journey the same as it got on the truck in the first instance. So one of those sections of the transport code says that diseased, defective and injured animals should not be transported unless they've had a veterinary certificate. So we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years working with the veterinary profession, getting a clear understanding of what diseased, defective or injured actually means to the veterinarian. So we've got a consistent interpretation of that fairly outcomes-based standard. And now we're working with the industry organisations, with federated farmers, with the transport industry, with the dairy industry, the meat industry, and we're promoting what's acceptable and what's not acceptable out to the suppliers in the farming community, so that we're all working off the same hymn sheet, we're working to the same standard. And it's critical that when you're selecting an animal, it's got to be able to make that journey. So sometimes you can put a somewhat compromised animal on a truck, but in the meat industry, these animals get transported up to 1,000 k's. And an animal can sometimes survive a journey of 50k or something down the road, but you stick it on a truck for 1,000 k's, and sometimes the transport process can leave you with a total mess the other end. So,
Gary, that leads me straight to the transporter's responsibility, the guy who's driving the truck.
Yes, that's right. Transport operators, they certainly have a responsibility. Once the animals are loaded onto the truck, the animal then becomes the responsibility of the driver until such time as it reaches its destination and the animals are offloaded. So one of the things that we want to see is good, healthy animals going onto trucks that, again, as Richard alluded to, that are going to travel safely and make the journey safely and not go down in the truck. Cows that are unfit for transport going down in trucks is one of the major issues that we have to deal with.
There must be legislation and sort of criminal concerns that you can use as a weapon.
Yes, that's right. I mean, in the most extreme cases, animals that are unfit for transport, they fall under the category under Section 12, 10 and 4 of the Animal Welfare Act in terms of condition of and health of animals, and that's a responsibility of both the farmer and the transport operator, and also more so for transport operators. Section 23 and the transportation of stock applies more to them in terms of carrying stock that is unfit for transport.
Richard, if an animal, for whatever reason, gets to the other end and it's a processing plant, what happens there?
All processing plants have a veterinarian attached to them. Our veterinarians are all warranted under the Animal Welfare Act, and we have pretty prescriptive procedures about how to deal with compromised animals when they get to the other end. So, number one, we're looking at the state of the animal in terms of animal welfare and whether or not that animal is fit to be processed, or whether or not that animal is suffering and needs to be condemned. The second issue we need to think about is what sort of communication or education goes back to the farmer or the person in charge. We will generate quite a lot of educational letters to farmers to sort of advise them of what we've found, and that's unacceptable in terms of the code and the standards, and that we actually monitor that farmer's performance. And then for more severe cases, we will refer them to Gary and the compliance people to do a follow-up on farm to see whether that's an isolated incident or whether or not there are more broader issues and more complicated issues on that farm. So to some extent, our vets, the 200 or so vets around all the processing plants in New Zealand, are the eyes and ears of the animal welfare in New Zealand, so we're providing that feedback, gathering that data, looking at trends, and just how are we going nationally in terms of our animal welfare compliance with our Act and our codes.
How does NATE fit in, Gary?
NATE's a new system that's just come along in the last 12, 18 months or so, and basically what that is an electronic monitoring system, and how that applies to the animals is once the animal leaves the farm, it's tracked all the way through. If it's going to the works, then it can be tracked from farm to the plate, and that's the basis behind that system.
And does that help you with your fight against people who are not playing by the right game rules?
Well, I think it's more to do with our accountability in terms of what we export overseas and what we produce and things like that. And it's all about setting a minimum standard that we expect all our farmers to abide by. And of course, that more from an exporting level, people that are buying our products are confident in the quality of what they're receiving.
And I guess, guys, we've got TB, and you've got TB grading from 0 to 10. Is there some sort of unofficial thing as far as animal welfare and transport? Yeah,
we grade cases on a sort of grade 1, 2 and 3, and in terms of grade 1 being a very serious case, grade 2 being less serious, and grade 3. So as I say, our grade 3 and our grade 2 cases tend to be educational approaches to the person in charge, whether they're a farmer or the transport operator. But hey, you need to be aware of the requirements under the Act, and not many farmers actually read codes of welfare. And I guess the grade 1s, as I said, are the more serious cases that we're only seeing what's coming to us. So it's a matter of going back to the farm, having a look, seeing whether or not there are other implications of what's going on. Sometimes there's a whole lot of human issues that are and animal welfare is a sort of a follow-on from that.
Garrett, it's all working together, isn't it, really?
Yes, it is, and we just going back on the point of the NATE system, where that applies to is to the lifestyle type farmer who's only carrying a few stock. I mean, it's important for their perspective that they've got an understanding of the legislation in terms of fit for transport and their obligations under NATE as well, because although they're only on small plots, they've still got a part to play in the big scheme of things.
Indeed. Very, very good advice there. And speaking of good advice, you're always full of it. The Hewlett Packard School Contest.
Yes, we're very excited. We're launching this week a partnership with Hewlett Packard for a rural schools competition based around information technology, hardware and support. Hewlett Packard came to us. They're very interested in finding solutions for schools around technology and helping them be innovative and getting our children ready for the world they're going to be living and working in once they've finished schooling. So they've got, put together a competition for rural schools, that's schools with fewer than 300 students in rural areas, to put up a case for why they would need additional support for their information technology program.
And this is the students that are doing it?
The students putting it together, a case to put forward for the schools to go in the pool for a share of $20,000 worth of IT equipment and support. And they've asked Rural Women to get on board with them, and we're absolutely thrilled to do that. It's gone out to all the rural schools in New Zealand this week, and it's open till July 25th for schools to apply for some funding to support their IT programs. And, you know, we're looking for them to be innovative, interesting, different things they can do, how it's going to impact positively on the whole school, not just a few students, but, you know, what the overall impact's going to be, and, you know, to look at how they can use that innovatively to support the children's education.
Brilliant, because now there's going to be sort of people reaching for phones straight after the program.
Well, absolutely, and that's the whole idea. We want, you know, schools to really think about what they're doing with their technology and how it can be best used to support the students, and also, you know, where they want to take it into the future to, you know, better equip children for the world they're going to be living and working in.
So as far as information and criteria, that's on your website or theirs?
Yes, it is. You can certainly download the information and criteria from the Rural Women website, and that's all available.
So just Google Rural Women New Zealand?
Google Rural Women New Zealand and up it'll pop, and that information can be downloaded. As I said, the information is already being sent to schools, but, you know, if the community wanted to put in an application on behalf of their local school, then they're more than able to do that.
So the schools have got it?
The schools will have it this week. Yep.
So there's no excuse when the PTA meet.
Exactly, and, you know, it's a great opportunity for boards of trustees to look at their strategy for information technology and what they're going to be doing into the future and how this might fit within that, and perhaps put a case forward to apply for some money.
Brilliant. Because it must be hard work getting things like IT stuff into a small school.
Well, it is, and I think for a lot of schools, a lot of that comes around with fundraising. And, you know, in a small rural school, you've only got a small number of families able to raise the money, but the costs are still quite high. So it's very difficult for rural schools to gather the fundraising needed, and also that whole interconnectivity with the broadband. You know, some schools still don't have good access to broadband, and you know, Hewlett Packard, HP are keen to work on solutions to that as well. So working with providers to see if there's something they can also do as part of this prize package.
It is a fundraiser, and it's lovely that the students are actually involved doing it. Enterprising women. Now, you guys are excellent at that.
It is, and it's another part of being innovative with the information technology, but also, you know, we prize innovation in the rural sector, and you know, really keen to support it. So we're again launching very soon through July our Enterprising Rural Woman of the Year Awards, and there's again the 4 categories with our sponsors, and looking again at women who are doing interesting and innovative things in the rural sector, and, you know, creating small businesses out of those little ideas they've had, and they've taken that, made it fly, and got something successful happening. So
I guess it's everything from Juliet, who's running the Sinlay Farms, down to someone who's making pickles in the kitchen.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had all kinds of businesses applying in the past, from women doing things with you know, the surplus wool clip, or, you know, with natural dyed wools. We've had women fashion design, we've had women using byproducts to make pharmaceuticals, we've had women who set up businesses, logging truck companies, so a wide range of businesses that women are involved in. So these awards again go into supporting that innovation.
Because it is astounding how many women have said, the farm's not working, I'm going to do something, or I'm bored, I'm going to do something.
Well, exactly. I think a lot of it comes, you know, partly, right, you know, years ago it was done, some of these businesses were set up to help keep the farm viable, and, you know, partly there's that there. But also there's a number of women now who want to have careers in their own right and be, you know, independent of the farm, but also, you know, celebrating the fact that they're rural, but, you know, they have their own life besides the farm, and they want to do something for themselves.
In modern communication, you can run a business anywhere in the world.
Absolutely, and a number of the, you know, quite a large number of these women are running global businesses. You know, they're exporting their products, and, you know, that's an incredible thing, you know, from your little backyard kitchen or back office to the rest of the world. Fabulous stuff.
Kerry, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be talking to Dr. Tony Davarin. Back to Rob's country. Tony, Ruataniwha, it's not the South Island one, the North Island one. What, can you unravel it? Because it seems as though nobody knows what's doing where and why.
Yeah, look, it's been a very long, I mean, well, it hasn't actually been a very long, protracted process. If you compare the time that they've spent on Ruataniwha to what we've spent on Central Plains water, it's actually really a tiny bit of time. And what has happened is the scheme has been driven a little bit differently than it has been down here. The Hawke's Bay Regional Council has actually driven the scheme. They've gone out, found the site, very proactive, gone out, found the best sites, settled on Ruataniwha, a large dam for Ruataniwha, and then gone through the consenting process. And at the same time, they've set up an investment company, Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Company, I think it's called, regional, whatever it's called. And so that company has been out looking for investors, including the farmers. No, I take that back, not including the farmers, but gone out and found investors, and they've also been working with the farmers.
Is that where Ngāi Tahu came in?
That's where Ngāi Tahu and Trustpower came in. So between the Irrigation Acceleration Fund, which the government has sort of promised money to go in to that, and Ngāi Tahu and Trustpower, they were the big investors. They were to be the big investors because it's $260 million to build the dam. So they were going into this as an investment, a long-term investment.
It's a South Island tribe.
That's right, a South Island tribe buying an investment in a North Island operation. This is purely a business decision.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sorry. I just wanted, you know.
Absolutely. At the same time as the investment side of this was going on, they were going through the consenting process. And under the government's sort of change to some of the resource management applications, consent applications, they set up an organisation called the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. They bypassed Hawke's Bay, because it's of national significance, they bypassed the consenting process as such and went straight to EPA. So this is like a high level, not quite an environment court, but high level organisation that will make the decision. They came back with their interim decision, and the conditions that Ruataniwha and its constituent farmers who would buy the water, the conditions that they had to operate on made it almost impossible for farming operations to go ahead and for the river to assimilate what was the leaching or the nutrient leaching that would take place. The EPA has gone away, and I think it's today or tomorrow they're due to come back with another decision. So everything is sort of, everybody's touching wood.
So who sent them away to sharpen
They
their
went
pencils?
away, I think they went away of their own volition, and I stand to be corrected on this.
To take another look?
To take another look and see.
Because of an uproar?
Yeah, I mean, everybody said, whoa, hang on a minute, this ain't going to work. And it was at about that time that both Trustpower and Ngāi Tahu decided to pull the pin on their investment. And
under those rules?
Under those rules. And at that stage, they were having difficulty because of those conditions that the EPA interim report came back, or decision came back, it was really difficult for farmers to see how they could operate under those conditions as well. So there wasn't the buy into the scheme. Farmers are buying into the scheme not as a shareholder initially, they're buying in on a long-term contract to buy water at around about 25 cents a cubic metre.
How does that compare with the rest of the country?
It's not that far away from something like Central Plains Water or Amiri or one of those. If you actually value those schemes, or if you look at Central Plains, for example, and the Waimakariri scheme, Huranui, and if you look at the cost of building those schemes, then the cost of their water per cubic metre is not too far away from that, except that if you're a farmer in one of those South Island schemes, at the end of the day, in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, the scheme's going to be paid off and you will be a shareholder in that scheme. You will not be a shareholder in Ruataniwha. You will always be buying your water.
So you won't be able to say, well, it's all paid off from here on and I get a dividend.
Yeah, so water becomes, actually the marginal cost of your water becomes relatively small. So, whereas we might be paying half of that for water or less than half of that per cubic metre in the South Island, they'll still be paying 25 cents a cubic metre for their water, but they won't have any responsibility for the investment in the infrastructure.
Have the government at all sort of mumbled or burbled anything about supporting it?
Yeah, they will give it. They have said, MPI have said that they will give it support, but they need to see what the decision is that comes back from the EPA and the final conditions. I mean, if the final conditions make it a no-goer, then we won't.
How many
have
times
investors.
can they be sent back to talk amongst themselves?
A really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm while I'm involved, I'm on the outside, but I keep an interest in it because we've got a number of clients in that area, of course, we've encouraged them to buy water in the scheme because it's, you get one chance and it's never cheaper than it is today.
Tony, thank you very much indeed, because as I said, we keep getting reports and you've just managed to bring it all into one, which is lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Tony's phone number is Hydro Services, and others you want to jot down on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you have just missed me again, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now.